My wife has a poster in her office. It says, "Today is a good day for a good day." Hi, this is Jim Gibson with Jim Gibson Business Sense Podcast. Thank you for joining me today. Today is a good day for a good day in business. I've not seen the business climate so positive in my entire life as it is today on this recording on February 2019. And what I'm going to be talking about today is I'm going to talk about how I started a small business. And if you're thinking about starting a small business, then you can maybe glean some good information from my experience. But I'm going to assist you in this area. I'm going to help you. I'm going to give you some advice. I'm going to show you what I did and what worked for me and what did not work for me. Now, the first thing to let you know is I'm an owner of Nova Voice and Data Systems, and I've been in business for 29 years now. I also own CableSupply.com, and if you go on my YouTube account at Cable Supply, you can see a lot of my videos, and you can see my face and hear me explain IT stuff. Now, if you're not in IT, that's okay, because a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today is not technical. I'm going to be talking about how to start a small business, what you need to do, the philosophy you need, and the practice of starting a business. Now, I have a master's degree in business administration, and no one ever taught me this. And all the courses I've taken on business, all the discussions I've had with professors, and all the books I've read, I've not seen anything that talks about how to start a small business. Now, in the last podcast, I talked about the E-Myth, and that is a fantastic book, and you should read that. If you're interested in going business, start to do some research. The E-Myth is one, and there's a lot of good business books out there that I'll be discussing during future podcasts that are really teach you a lot. And I have said in the past to people, I said, the best way to start a business is with no money, because that's the way you're going to learn how to do things without money, and that's going to force you to think through things. It's going to force you to have a plan. It's going to force you to treat customers with respect, a value that they are. I heard one person said it's not the employees who count the cash that matter. It's the customers who give you the cash that matters. And it's not how much you make, it's how much you get to keep. That's another great quote that I've heard. So I've learned a lot over the years. I've done a lot over the years. And we're going to talk about some of my successes and some of my failures. And hopefully you can learn from them, and maybe you can use my way of starting a business as a model. But I determined pretty much early on that I could not spend any money in my business. I have a family. I have mortgage, and I have car payments and credit card payments and just life. And I had a really good job, Burlington Air Express. I was a senior communications analyst there. I was making okay money. It wasn't great, but it was okay money. It was enough to meet all my needs, plus it was health insurance. But I did want to go in business, and it's not because somehow some people say, well, I want to go in business because I don't want a boss. Well, if you go in business for yourself, you got a lot of bosses, and they're called customers, and you better treat them right or they'll fire you. And rightfully so if you don't do exactly what you said you're going to do, and if you don't, have the success that you promised them. And if you don't price things right, you're going to go out of business also. So the first thing I decided was that I was going to start the business with no money. And probably if other people are talking about starting businesses, they're always talking about capital and things like that. I started Nova Voice and Data Systems. It turned into a multi-million-dollar company, and I did it without any of my own money. The business had to generate money on its own. And so I started out, I did not have tools besides, I had screwdrivers and wire cutters and things like that, but I didn't have what they call in the IT industry a butt set, which was a test set for voice circuits. And back in the 80s, that's how you had to put in a phone system. You needed a butt set. You also needed a tone and probe. Now, a butt set back then was $400 or $500, brand new. A tone and probe, you're talking a couple $100. And then at the same time, you not only needed those, but you needed some basic things like ladders. Ladders are really good things because if you got to, take down ceiling tiles to put the cable above the ceiling tile, you're going to have to get up there. And I didn't have that. I did have a pickup truck already. I always believe in pickup trucks. I think everyone should have a pickup truck because they're so valuable and you can do so many things with them. But I had a pickup truck, thank God. But I didn't even have a ladder. And I remember writing down as one of my goals was to buy a ladder. At any rate, I ran into a dentist who found out that I was doing work on the side, as they would say, even though I reported all my taxes and everything else properly. I got a job with him to put in one jack, and I was going to charge him $55. The only problem is I didn't have any wire, I did not have a jack, I did not have a ladder. So what happened is I had a friend that worked in the industry, and he gave me the parts that I needed to start with. And once I had $55, I paid him back what I borrowed from him. And at the same time, I went and went on different areas to find out if I could get a butt set. And I forget where I got it from, but I got a used butt set. So now I'm one step ahead. And I started getting 1 or 2 jobs a month, very slow at the beginning. Then at that point, I could get a ladder. Then I could get cable. And I remember having 1 box of cable. And if you've ever cabled a building and you only have 1 box and you got 10 cable, what they would call cable pulls, where you have 10 cables going from the data room to 10 jacks out in the office area, if you really need 5 boxes and do 5 major pulls. And this is getting too technical probably, but the idea is if you don't have enough cable, what happens is it takes longer in labor. If you don't have enough boxes of cable, individual boxes, it takes a lot longer to cable a building. So I would keep very close tabs on how much cable I had left and make sure that I ordered another box of cable in time to do the next job. And finally, I would get enough money where I could actually afford to have more than 1 box of cable at a time. So I learned a lot at that time. I learned that I had to keep track of product. I learned that I had to treat customers with a lot of respect. Maybe deep down inside I was thinking, wow, this customer's demanding too much. But at the same time, I realized that they're the ones that pay the bills, and they're the ones that allow me to get the parts that I need. And, of course, I also learned that you got to keep track of not only the customers, we got to keep track of your accounts receivable, accounts payable, mileage in your truck, parts used, taxes, things like that. And we're going to talk about that later on in the podcast. So it slowly grew, and it was very slow. And pretty soon I had some ideas on how to generate more income. And one of the things I would do is I would go to the Microsoft dealers in the area, and I would find them in the Yellow Pages. Hey, you need telephones or something. Yellow Pages. That's for those who do not know what the Yellow Pages are. That was a phone book where businesses advertised. And I kind of half say this jokingly because I know there's some people out there that probably never saw Yellow Pages before. But that's where you would find, if you need a plumber or something, you'd open that up. There was no internet back then. So what I would do is I would go and I would go to the Yellow Pages and I'd look up, computer companies, and I would find the local computer company that, let's say, had, a Microsoft dealer. And I would go and visit that computer company. It had little business cards. They weren't very expensive. And I had on there that I would do cabling. And so when I went there, I'd go in and I would talk to hopefully the owner, and I would say, do you do your own cabling? And they would say, oh, no, we don't do that. We let the customer take care of the cabling themselves. And I said, well, how about if I do this? How about if I do your cabling for you? And I give you a fixed price. I found that fixed price really worked well for these people. I said, so you can just call me up and say, I have 10 outlets I need put in this address, and I'll go out and put in the 10 outlets, and I'll do it for $35 an outlet. $35, man. Ooh, back then, though, that was pretty good money. It was decent money. How's that? You had to leave enough money on the table for the customer, in this case, the Microsoft dealers, Microsoft partners as they call them, so they could charge their customer. So maybe they charge $55 an hour, or not an hour, $55 a drop. And then, they can make some profit on what you're doing. So I knew I was the lowest price cabler out there, and they were happy with that. I had a license, I had a business license. I had my contractor's license, and we're going to talk about that a little later. But at any rate, I had a steady stream of jobs, pretty much a steady stream. So I had 4 or 5 Microsoft dealers that would call me up to do cabling for them, and they'd give me the address, how many drops. I would do the drops, and I would invoice them for it, and they would have 30 days to pay me. So that worked really well, and maybe if you're starting in the industry and you want to become a cabler, you need to find some companies like that work with other small businesses. Some of the Microsoft partners work with a lot of small businesses. And so you find those type of people, and then what you do is you come up with an agreement. Make sure it's in writing, by the way, and we're going to talk about that a little later. But you come up with that type of idea, and then you service them, and they're really your customer. The person who signs the check is your customer, so don't be confused with that. So if I'm dealing with a Microsoft partner, he's really my customer. It's not the person I'm putting the jacks in behind the wall. But if I don't do it right and I don't do it neat, then his customer gets upset with him. But it's always your customer is always the person who signs the check. So that was one way I did it. Now another way I did it, which is kind of different, is I went around to the business parks. And when you're at the business parks, they always have a rental office. And so I went into the rental office, and often there was a early 20-something woman who was their, receptionist type of thing. And I'd introduce myself to her, and I'd give her some of my business cards and things like that. And I found out after a while that was kind of useless. I didn't get a lot out of that. So what I did was I got myself some little candy dishes, and I had my name, my company name, Nova Business Systems. At that time, that's what it was called. Had my company name printed on the side of these little glass containers. And my phone number was there. And I had an 800 number back then. And the 800 numbers were very inexpensive. They cost you money, but, if you have a customer calling you on the 800 number, then it was very inexpensive. And so, because, customer's going to pay you for a job, so that makes it worthwhile. So anyway, make a long story short, I'd fill it up with Jelly Bellies. On the bottom of the candy dish, I'd put a little sticker underneath there, and it would say, for free refills, call this number. And so, of course, the receptionist, who I think would probably eat more Jelly Bellies than anyone else, would call me up and tell me that it was time to refill their candy dish. And I've learned many years ago in the Marine Corps that you treat receptionists with a tremendous amount of respect, or else it will come back and bite you. I had a situation, quickly I'll just say this, that I had to deal with a civilian secretary to a colonel. And I treated her rudely when I was a second lieutenant, and I paid dearly because of that. And eventually I went to her and apologized for my rude behavior, and then my life became easier. But I learned the lesson that to treat people with respect, no matter who it is. Even if you disagree with them, you treat them with respect, and especially receptionists. And in this case, these receptionists at these business parks would call me up and tell me there was a new tenant coming in, that the tenant was taking over a new building and needed cabling or needed a phone system. And so I would go to that area or go to that person, contact them, and I would introduce myself. And that person would, hire me to do the work, put in 10 jacks. Now, I didn't charge $35 to that person because that was the end user. I would charge $50 per jack, which was very comfortable back then. And I'd get a lot of jobs that way. And I'd always make sure that whenever I got a referral, even if it didn't work out, always rewarded the receptionist with something, some chocolates or something that they would like. And I made sure that I showed up about once a week, and I always had an excuse. I said, hey, is your candy jar empty? Or, oh, no, it's not, but let me fill it up completely, get it up to the top. And then I would chit-chat with them, and I would ask them about their family and about their kids, things like that. And that really worked really well for me. So over the time period of using those two techniques, dealing with Microsoft partners who needed someone to come in and do the cabling because they did not do cabling, and then also working with the receptionists in the business parks in my area, it worked really well, especially with the receptionists when you knew their names. You had to remember their names, treat them with respect, and also, just develop that relationship so they trust you. And then once you reward them, of course, they want to give you more business because, hey, everyone likes a reward, and if they get something extra at work, fantastic, So those things worked for me fairly well back then at the beginning. But I remember, here I am. I got health insurance. I got, dental. I got a steady income, and yet I'm still working nights. And sometimes it's going to be a hard time, especially at that point. Yeah, actually, any time, it's going to sometimes demand a lot of your effort and a lot of your energies. And what I would do is I'd go to work extra early. I had an agreement with my boss I could start extra early, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning. Of course, I was on the West Coast, but a lot of our company was on the East Coast, or hours earlier than I would, so there was good justifications to show up at 6 in the morning and to communicate with our employees who were working on the East Coast. So I'd show up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and then I'd put in my 8 or 10 hours, and then I would cable at night. And sometimes cabling at night meant, I'd be starting at 5 o'clock at night, and in a handful of cases, more than a handful of cases, I'd work all night, get a shower, go back to work. That would happen often. And it was usually by myself. So sometimes I'd be in a complete warehouse that that someone bought or rented, and they had not moved in it or things like that, and it was completely empty. And I would be in this large building all by myself at 3 o'clock in the morning, in a gang-infested area of L.A. But at the same time, I had a pretty good income from doing that. So what I would do is, like during lunch, I would spend time calling up those Microsoft partners or going out to meet the secretaries in the business parks and see if I could dig up some work for the next day or the next week or whatever. Always keep the relationship going with both groups of individuals. And then at 5 o'clock, I would start to work in a building cabling. Now, that's really a good time to start anyway, because you don't want, if you can do it at that time, if they'll let you do it at that time, it's best to do it at night because you don't have employees walking under your ladder, don't have employees tripping over cables, things like that, and you can get a lot done. And it's less stressful to do it when the business is closed than it is to do it while they have customers, things like that. So that was one of the things I did, but the work was inconsistent. So it wasn't that every week I could guarantee that I had money. The only guaranteed money I knew was a salary coming from Burlington Air Express. So what I decided I was going to do was I was going to start to chart it out. I was very confused. How do I do these things? How do I chart this stuff out? How do I figure out when to go full time? Because I'm working some nights like crazy. And then I'd work 2 or 3 days, or 2 or 3 days would go by and there would be no work for me to do. So I started charting, and I charted, each day how much work I did, and then I added up at the end of the week. And one week would be fantastic, next week would be completely dead. It's unpredictable. And so I said, well, what happened? I thought to myself, what happens if I look at it by the month? And the months were unpredictable. And by this time, I've been doing this for a year and a half. And, 1 month it'd be very profitable. The next month it would be almost dead, nothing. And so I decided, well, how about if I do it by the quarter? If I took 3 months at a time, January to March, April to June, things like that, every 3 months. And what I noticed, there was a pattern. And the pattern was of growth, pretty good growth too. So I I could do a chart in Excel, a bar chart, and for the last year and a half, and I could put a ruler across the top of the bars, and I could project that if things stayed like it was each quarter, that at a certain time I could go into business full-time for myself. So up to then it was part-time. And once I could chart out and I could see, within 6 months I'll be full-time in my business, or I'll have the ability, or I'd have to start turning down some work. So I knew exactly then when I was going to go into business. And it was kind of hard to tell your boss, hey, here's my notice. I think I gave Burlington about a month's notice. And I also told them that, after I left, if there was something there that was confusing, I'd be more than happy to talk to people on the phone or come back and explain what I was doing so they could have a good turnover. It's always good leaving a business that way. Just don't leave and, adios, you're not paying me anymore, tough luck, so bad. That doesn't work very well. It's going to come back to bite you. But if it's been a good company and they treated you well and your checks have cleared in the bank, then, you're no longer there and all. We'll treat those people with respect also. And if a 10-minute conversation or visiting for a half hour can help them out in progress in what the projects that you used to work on, well, then, do it happily with a smile on your face, because those things will go far. And it did for me, because my boss's boss left Burlington and went on to another company called AmeriQuest Mortgage, and AmeriQuest Mortgage was growing in leaps and bounds. And you know who he called? He called me. He called me to help him with his voice projects. He gave me a lot of work, and I'm always grateful to that boss of mine. And I worked for years. I put in over 800 locations for AmeriQuest Mortgage all over the country. So it was very profitable, but it was also, I believe, that I treated him with respect. At the same time, after I left, I took phone calls and I helped my predecessor in taking over my old job. So things come back to help you, and they can also come back to hurt you. Pay attention to that. Now, some of the principles I learned in this process that turned into Nova Voice and Data was I learned about, first of all, treating people with respect, especially customers. Customers are the ones that are going to pay your bills. But I also learned that starting out small taught me a lot about managing technicians and of course I hired after, at one point I hired a couple of people and went all the way up to, I think it was like 35 people at one point. But what I learned is that when you start small, it's easier to manage mistakes, and it's just a better way to do it, in my opinion. If I had to start all over again, that's how I would start. I would start with no money and build from no money. Now, if hey, you don't have to start exactly at the bottom. If you got a couple $100 or a couple thousand, okay, that's fine. But I think you have an advantage by starting there because your mistakes are small, and you learn from them, and you keep on going on, and then you're not going to have the problems. So that's one thing I learned. Now, the second thing I learned is I did all my research. So I knew what type of requirements from the government that were necessary. So I learned that I needed a business license. I learned I needed a contractor's license. I learned that I needed approval from the state of the pickup sales tax. I also learned that I needed a EIN number, and that's a federal identification number. I don't know why they call it employer's identification number, I'm sure. And you can get that fairly quick. You got to have one of those. It's very easy to get. It's the Social Security number for your business. And when you run a business, if it's not a proprietorship, a single owner business company type of thing, you're going to have that. Now, I just want to remind you that I am not a lawyer. And your situation might be different, and maybe the situation has changed over the years. So you really need to do your own research, and you really need to find out what's legal and what's not legal. But you're going to need all these things, and you're going to need to set them up. And so that's one of the things that I've learned, and I had that all in place before I even started. And again, I started out as a business, not as a corporation. Later, I incorporated. And so when we start talking on the next podcast, we're going to talk about incorporating. We're going to talk about how to incorporate. We're going to talk about some other things that you're going to need when you're a small business and you're just starting out. Well, just want to thank you for your time. And just remember that phrase we said at the beginning. It's a great day for a great day. And now's a great time to start a business. Thank you.